Hi, I'm Garrett Wilkin, and I have a presentation today about overpopulation. It will cover key terms, causes of overpopulation, how it affects us, and what we can do about it. Well, let's get right into it. So we have some key terms that will be important to understand overpopulation. Those terms are carrying capacity, birth rate and death rate, population growth, overpopulation, and quality of life. I'll give a quick definition for all these terms. For carrying capacity, it's how many people can live in a certain location, but in this case, it'll just be our planet. Birth rate and death rate is how many people are born or die in a certain time frame. Population growth is how it's birth rate minus the death rate, so it's how fast the population is growing or declining. Overpopulation is when you exceed the carrying capacity, and quality of life is how good your life is, how many resources you have, and things like that. So what is overpopulation more in depth? Well, as I just said, overpopulation is when the population exceeds the carrying capacity. This will happen, as I said, birth rate exceeds the death rate. You have more people in the same amount area with the same amount of resources. Then each person will have less resources, and eventually there won't be enough to support everyone to survive. And when you're overpopulated, obviously it can have big negative consequences. Well, then we get into our carrying capacity, which is how many people who can potentially survive on our planet. This is not a stagnant number. It can change constantly due to technology, more available resources, or even can decline if the environment gets worse. It is very hard to guess what our carrying capacity is because it's not really a fixed number. It can change all the time, and there's just no good way to measure it. But right now, the carrying capacity is estimated to be around 8 to 16 billion, which we're currently at about 7.5 million. So that number seems very close. And it also seems worse when we get into other stuff. The big problem with looking at strictly carrying capacity is that it doesn't look at quality of life also. Because the more people you have on a planet, the more resources that's getting spread out, thinned out, and it means the quality of life isn't as good for everyone. So even if you're not hitting that carrying capacity, life can get worse the more people who are on the planet. And it also doesn't account for that supplies aren't equally distributed. So people who are rich will have more access to more resources than people who are poor. So even if we don't hit that carrying capacity limit, the poorer people may suffer. One of the bleak things about looking at overpopulation is looking at population growth and how it grows exponentially, which makes sense when you think about it, but in recent years, population growth has actually started to slow down. This is because of first world countries and countries that are better educated are better off. People who live there tend to have less kids. So those countries' populations are remaining steady or even declining, but while third world countries are having rapid expansion. Because third world countries are growing so rapidly, people who live there are most likely affected by overpopulation. But this doesn't just affect them. This affects those who are in poverty, who can't afford increased prices for goods and resources because there's less to go out. And even those in the middle class can suffer more from the higher costs of living. So looking into that, how do we slow down population growth? Well, one way is through education. People who have more education are less likely to have more kids. So if we bring more education to these poorer countries and make that more accessible, then our population rate will slow down. Another way is to reduce poverty. People who live in poorer countries or are more poor are more likely to have kids. This is the same effects as education and can be dealt with in the same way. The last way is to support global women's rights. In countries where women don't have equal rights as men, the population growth is way higher than it is with where women do have rights. So fighting for these issues isn't only morally correct, it also helps with overpopulation. Here are some organizations fighting overpopulation if you want to support. There's the Population Media Center, who fight for environmental protection and equal rights for women. And there's also Population Balance, that are bettering the environment, and they try to educate about overpopulation. There are also more organizations that are fighting overpopulation, but any organization that's helping fight for the environment and making the world a better place are helping. On the flip side, if you want to not support companies who are causing pollution and making our carrying capacity lower, there are 100 companies responsible for 71% of all greenhouse emissions on our planet, with ExxonMobil, Shell, BP, and Chevron being the top 4. Just some ending notes. Thank you for listening, and all sources will be available in the video description below. Thank you.